Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today we're gonna have a pretty unusual video. We're gonna be talking about Russia a lot, but I really wanted to make this video because there is just so much that I feel like people, especially in Europe and in the US, are not aware of. And I just really wanted to share this with everyone. I think I'm gonna be doing a second video in Russian later on, but yeah, so let me start just by giving you a little bit of my background because I don't want you to think that I'm just a filmmaker who suddenly took this as like a hobby, like talking about politics and Russia and whatever, without actually having any knowledge or qualification about this. So as some of you know, I actually minored in Russian and Slavic studies at NYU. I also briefly lived in Moscow back in, I believe it was 2017. I attended Moscow State University for one summer semester where all the courses were taught in Russian. I speak Russian. It's not my first or second language, it's actually my third language after English. So, and of course, as you can guess yourself by now, I have lived in Russia, Europe, specifically Italy, and the United States. So I believe I have this, I have the privilege of being able to see this situation from very different points of view and to understand each and every single part's point of view, which I think is very important because what a lot of people, especially in Europe and the United States, don't realize right now is that there isn't just a physical war going on between Russia and Ukraine. There is also a virtual war going on between Russia and what Russian media likes to call the West, meaning mostly Europe and the United States. They refer it to as Zapad in Russian. And basically throughout the like ever since the beginning of this millennium, the Russian media has really loved to use this word, most often in a negative way, meaning that the West is something that constantly opposes Russia, that the West is basically an enemy of Russia in a very, Cold War reminiscing kind of way. And we're gonna talk about that in detail later on. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that first. So there is this virtual war going on between Russia and the West, but the funny thing is that I don't even think that the West is really aware of this, because the thing is that the Russian media has a very strong and solid narrative that they have been telling the Russian people for pretty much 22 years right now. And yeah, according to this narrative, especially right now during the war, it would seem as if the entire West was plotting against Russia. A lot of Russian so-called nationalists, for lack of a better word, actually blame the Ukrainian-Russian war on the US, believe it or not. And again, I'm gonna be talking about this in more detail later on. But yeah, that's just like the basic premise that I wanted everyone to be aware of. And also, by the way, I was also going to minor in politics back when I was at NYU. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to complete all of the credits required to minor in politics, but I did have the chance to take political theory with Professor Paul Ahrens Nomo. He's this brilliant professor. I highly recommend him to anyone who might be studying at NYU right now. So I took political theory with him, and then I took international politics with Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. He's a pretty famous political scientist. He's published many books. I believe that his most famous theory is the selectory theory. And he's even featured in the Netflix documentary series How to Become a Tyrant, which, by the way, I really loved and I highly recommend it to everybody out there. And so, yeah, so that's my like very small expertise in politics. I know it's not a lot, but yeah, unfortunately, like I said, I didn't have the time to finish my minor, but I just want people to be aware that like I didn't just suddenly take up politics as an interest and I'm here talking to you without actually having any type of knowledge whatsoever, because I know that a lot of people like to do that. So yeah, so that is my experience learning about Russia, living in Russia, learning about international politics and all of that. And of course, like most of you already know, I lived in Italy for 19 years, then I moved to the US, and I have been living there for 6 years now. So, yeah, so I guess let's just start. All right, so the inciting incident that prompted me to make this video was the fact that lately I have been talking to a lot of, again, so-called Russian nationalists online because my personal friends from Russia, they are all against the war. And I was just really curious to see what, the other side thought about this. How could they support the war? How could they still support the president at this point? And so on and so forth. So this actually started on Instagram, and then later on, because Instagram was basically banned in Russia, it continued on Telegram. And I'm gonna warn you, some of this stuff is very, very cringe. So the first thing that I wanted to say that I think a lot of people are aware right now is that a lot of Russian influencers, specifically TikTokers, seem to have been set up by someone to to share pro-Russian propaganda on the web, particularly TikTok. And I know there's many videos online. I will leave a few links to that in the description box. But yeah, basically what gave these people away was the fact that they were in fact reciting the same exact script, like the same exact words over and over again. And that's just that's definitely too much of a coincidence to be just that. So yeah, so that's the first thing that I think people need to be aware of. And so what happened then is that I started reading some posts that this Russian blogger started to share on Instagram, which, first of all was unusual because knowing this Russian blogger from some time, I knew that she had never been talking about politics, that like she had no expertise whatsoever about this. She is what Russian people refer to as a beauty blogger, by the way, which means that basically she talks about, like personal travel, makeup, cosmetics, and all of that. So obviously, it was a bit weird, but again, I was aware of the fact that apparently some of these people have been paid or whatever to spread some pro-Russian words. So that in itself wasn't too strange. What was really strange for me was the fact that this one blogger started writing paragraphs after paragraphs of what I could just sum up as some crazy conspiracy theories that I thought no reasonable human being would ever believe in. And I'm just gonna read it to you. One other thing that I need to talk about in this video is the so-called concept of patriotism, what it means for Russian people specifically, and how it is manipulated not just by Russia, but in general by, I believe, any state to just share more propaganda and to share this feeling that if you do not agree with everything that your country's government does, basically that means that you're an anti-Russian, anti-American, anti-Italian, and so on and so forth. It's basically a method of manufacturing consent, I feel Chomsky would say. So let's just get into it. So the first post said basically, I am Russian and I am not ashamed of being Russian. The only people who should be ashamed are the people who are ashamed to be Russian. So the first bold claim that she made was that the Americans are moving NATO to Russian borders. Russia is defending its people, and it's doing so that her territory and her citizens would be safe. So, of course, she's referring to the ongoing situation in Ukraine and saying that this was a way for Russia to defend itself from Americans and NATO, who are apparently on the borders of Russia. Yeah. And that's so Russia is basically doing this just to defend itself and its citizens and all of that jazz. And then she said, as Vladimir Vladimirovich, meaning Putin, said, he is not going to repeat the same mistakes that the Soviet Union made at the beginning of the Great Patriotic War. In Russia, they call it Великая Отечественная война, which basically refers to World War II. By the way, there is no source that she is mentioning that would support her claim that, again, Americans are moving in to Russian borders with NATO backing them up and all of that. So just wanted to make that clear. Then again, the decision to start the specoperacja, the special operation, that's what they like to call it in Ukraine, was taking into consideration the declarations made by the UN. This was a necessary move to defend the country as the обстрелы, as the shootings, sorry, were already growing closer to the Russian border. Actually, she says to the borders of our Rodina, which basically means motherland. Yeah, another like very patriotic term. So again, this is a very bold claim that she's not citing any source that she's taking this from. Same for the what she refers to as the UN declaration. I don't know what she's referring to. She doesn't say anything more about this. And yeah, so moving on. Okay, then she says the next thing is why throughout the 8 years of war on the Donbass, everybody was quiet about this, nobody was taking part in it. Okay, I wanted to do a separate video about explaining, the origins of this conflict, particularly what has been going on in the Donbass since 2014, because it is a pretty lengthy story, obviously, and again, because there are two very different narratives, one coming from Russia and one coming from Ukraine and basically the rest of the world. So and I have been asking Ukrainian people about this because I don't want to share just some incorrect information, because we already have tons of that all over the internet. So I'm working on that, but that's for another video. So moving on. Again, I am Russian. I am for peace. I am for peace in Russia. To me, what matters are the interests of the sorry, it's just kind of hard to just translate everything automatically, of the citizens of Donetsk, Lvova и других городов Украины, and the rest of Ukraine, and not the wages of people from the United States, Colombia, and so on and so forth. And then she goes on to say Russia is a great force, Россия великая держава. Yeah, I believe that's part of the national anthem. It also says we, Ukraine, Russia, and the Republic of Belarus are one people. All right, so this was her first post, and there's again, there's a lot to unpack here. First, this claim that Russia basically started this war to defend itself from the Americans, who were basically going to I guess, invade Russia again. She says that the Americans were close to the Russian borders, that NATO was close to the Russian borders. Again, this is a claim. She doesn't mention any sources or any of that. And it's actually interesting because what I have found out while I was doing these social experiments basically is that Russian people have two main narratives by virtue of which they explain or actually they try to justify why Russia would start this war. And the first one is the one that she just mentioned, which is that Americans were somehow planning to invade Russia and that they were using Ukraine to do exactly that. I read other claims according to which Americans have been planting weapons of mass destructions in Ukraine for years. So there is another, of those claims. Again, no sources about this except for like videos coming from Russian television. And of course, as I have been explaining over and over again, those are not exactly neutral sources of information, not just because Russian media is entirely controlled by the state, but also for the simple fact that, when you have a conflict between two nations, obviously you cannot expect either of those two parts to be necessarily objective about it. So that's the first thing. Again, first claim is that Americans and NATO were planning to harm Russia and Russian citizens in some way, either by invading or something like that, as far as I can understand it. The second claim, which I believe is fairly more popular, is what Putin himself has said when he was addressing Russian people at the beginning of this war, which is that uh, Russia has gone to free Ukraine from the presence of Nazis and so-called bandits. Again, I can understand that this may sound very strange to so-called Western people, but believe it or not, a lot of Russian people actually believe this. By the way, there is a lot of videos going around, like Telegram and other platforms that there apparently would back these versions of events up, and obviously they are fake, and it's very easy to see that they're fake, but nevertheless, a lot of these people just believe this. Their only sources of information are Russian media. And yeah, actually, let's stop for a moment and talk about this, because when I asked this blogger what her sources of information and basically where all of her claims came from, it was interesting because initially she did not reply. And actually, I had to ask that very question over and over again before I could get any answer. And the first one was that, and I'm gonna put the screenshot up to show you guys, was that she told me that she doesn't trust Western media or Russian media. She doesn't trust any of those because, as she puts it, there's a lot of lies coming from both sides. So that was the first thing that she said. And then she said that she gathers her information from relatives that she has in Ukraine. But when I asked her where these relatives are from, like where exactly in Ukraine do they live, again, she wouldn't reply. She wouldn't give any other information. But then when I went on to check this woman's Telegram group, it was very interesting because as I scrolled up, all I could find were posts about the war, and they were all coming from, you guessed it, Russian media. Except for, and this I just find so hilarious, because the only other TV channel that I could find that wasn't Russian on these groups was Fox News. And I just can't. And by the way, it wasn't even like when I viewed some of either the videos that I found that were already on the group or videos that people started sending to me, it wasn't even like a clip from Fox News that was in English. It was either a clip that had been dubbed in Russian, which again, that is really not an objective, source of information to just have, uh, when somebody has dubbed over the original language, obviously. And then on a few instances, there were these clips where I remember, like in one of them, there was the presenter of the program. I don't remember what his name was, who was, just speaking fluent English, obviously, because he's American. And then when the guest who was being interviewed started talking, it was so clear that it had been dubbed over with somebody speaking English with a very thick Russian accent. And I just couldn't believe that somebody could possibly believe this. And yes, you could argue that a lot of these people do not speak English, so they may not realize that somebody has an accent when speaking English. But the thing is that I showed this very video to my brother-in-law, who basically only speaks Italian. I mean, he speaks like a tiny little bit of English, but yeah, he mostly just speaks Italian. And even he was like, what the hell is this? Like, you can definitely tell that somebody has dubbed this over and has done so in a very poor way. So yeah, so there's that. So now moving on. There's a lot of patriotic elements in this post, and this is gonna be my next point. So the fact that a lot of these people call themselves patriots, but what I want to talk about is that there is a big difference between the concept of country and the concept of current regime in power of that country, which means that just because somebody is a patriot and loves their country, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to agree with everything that the current government is doing, because that is by definition, I believe, fascism. But for so many of these people, for some reason, there's this huge confusion between these two concepts. And I'm not sure why. I believe I should definitely look more into this in order to be able to explain this. But basically, what I'm talking about is the difference between genuine patriotism and blind patriotism, which leads one to just, justify whatever one's country is doing, just because they fear that if they don't, they will be labeled as anti patriotic.